Hello, everyone, and welcome to your Wednesday Word of Grace on this St. Patrick's Day. And a happy luck of the Irish to you on this day. I am Rennie, and I am the pastor of Mills River United Methodist Church. And it's always a joy to come to you on these Wednesdays. This week, as part of our Lenten focus, we're talking about loving service, cultivating loving service, and how doing so, it requires us to let go of some of our comfort. And as we're talking about these things, a prayer from the Talmud, or a teaching from the Talmud, which is a Jewish collection of wisdom from rabbis and teachers, kept coming out, and I want to begin with that today. So let's take a look at. Those are powerful words derived and built on the wisdom of Micah chapter 6, verses 6 through 8, where we're reminded that what God wants most from us is to live justly, walk humbly, and serve our God. And the best way that we can serve our God is to serve God by serving each other, by stepping out in faith to meet the needs, to meet the suffering, to enter into the pain and the problems and the difficulties of this world. I'm sure many of you are aware of the recent domestic terror attack, this just yesterday, where a young man killed 8 Asian Americans in a targeted attack of hate and racially motivated violence. This is just one example of the ongoing suffering that exists in our country and in so many places, based on a deeper suffering and fear of those who believe that their power, their place, their existence is being taken away from them. This is just one of the ways that we can begin to meet the world in its needs, by stepping out and advocating for justice, for equity, by speaking out against racism and racially motivated violence, by listening to Asian American and African American and all the different ethnicities and cultures that are part of our life together, and hearing their experiences and learning from one another. But wherever you see suffering in the world, wherever you see a need in the world, wherever your heart is most touched by the pain and struggle of another human being, that is your opportunity and invitation from God to step up and be the hands and feet of Christ, meeting the suffering of Christ, Christ serving Christ. I know in this time of pandemic and separation, even as we're moving toward gathering again, and it was so good to be with you this past Sunday in in-person worship, that it's still hard. It's still hard to make connections. There are griefs and pains that are part of the life of the last year. And your word of grace today is this: where you find yourself struggling or suffering, where you find yourself in pain or need, know that Christ stands alongside you, that God is with you in the midst of that and wants to bring you to wholeness and healing. One of the ways that God invites you to experience that healing is to step out in service to others for the need which you have. Luke chapter 6, Jesus is teaching about what is the nature of following God and faithful, loving service. And in verse 31, he says this: treat people in the same way that you want them to treat you. We've all heard that. The golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think we've repeated it and taught it and thought about it so much in our lives that we can miss sometimes the power of the invitation of that. And that's why I really like how the Message renders this teaching of Jesus. Hear it again, Luke 6:31 from the Message. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you, then grab the initiative and do it for them. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you, then grab the initiative and do it for them. So if you're lonely and waiting for someone to reach out, think about who else might be lonely and reach out to them. If you're wanting to grow in your faith or relationship with God and you're waiting for someone to step out and say, hey, come and grow, or you know someone else who is searching and wanting to grow in their faith, reach out and say, hey, let's grow in faith together. If you're waiting for someone to offer a hand of fellowship or issue an invitation for a meal or a Zoom hangout or a conversation, reach out to them and say, hey, let's have this conversation. Let's do this thing. Jesus' call in the Golden Rule has often been presented to us in a way that seems reactive, where we wait for someone to do something harmful to us and then we resist doing something harmful to them, or we react by then doing something kind to them. But Jesus' call in this Golden Rule is proactive, which is why I love that Message translation so much. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you, then take the initiative and go do it for them. On this St. Patrick's Day, this day is rooted in a long tradition in the Christian church of celebrating the lives of the saints who teach us what it means to live holy lives according to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Today is actually a celebration of the death of St. Patrick. He died on March 17th, way back in the 4th century. But St. Patrick's life is a truly powerful one, and though most of the stories about him are well-spun tales of Irish legend and myth, we do know a little bit about who he was and what he experienced. And we know that when he was a teenager, he was kidnapped by Irish raiders and forced to live and work in a remote and lonely life as a shepherd for about 6 years until he escaped his captors and returned to England, where he was born. While there in Ireland, he relied heavily on his Christian faith and had a vision of God who told him to go back to Britain. And once he returned to Britain, he had another vision from God that said, now carry Christ back to Ireland. And so he undertook training as a priest, became ordained in the church, and then was set out with a dual mission of ministering to those Christians already in Ireland, as well as to inviting others to become Christians in Ireland. Now, as someone who had been kidnapped as a young man, forced to live a hard and suffering life away from his family, away from what he knew, Patrick very easily could have let that bitterness keep him from returning. But he knew the power of God to change and transform and rescue. He knew the wonders of God to ease suffering and to bring healing. And so when God called him back to Ireland, Patrick stepped up. He stepped up with love, even for those that he probably still counted a little bit as his enemies. And I'm sure it was uncomfortable and uncertain for him to go back to Ireland and do that. And yet he is now the patron saint of Ireland because he was willing to give his life, even for people that had seemingly taken his away. This is a true celebration of St. Patrick's Day, when we can find the ways that we, as people from different places and different cultures and different backgrounds, from different denominations and different faiths, can learn how to serve one another, are willing to give up our own comfort and convenience and pleasure in order to make sure that we can all live with more justice, more equity, and more freedom. Our lives are designed to be given for one another through Jesus Christ. This is the invitation that God offers to us through loving service, that in relieving the suffering of those around us, we find our own suffering, our own burdens to be lighter as well. Here's a story that Bishop Snazy shares. This is part of our Monday night Bible study as we delve more deeply into our topics, but I wanted to share this story with you. So when he was in seminary, one rainy night, I started up the stairs to my apartment and I encountered one of my professors, Dr. D. He was one of the most respected theologians of the generation, and I was surprised to see him in a student dorm. Covered in a wet overcoat, he was carrying groceries up the stairs. I offered to help, and as we walked together, I heard the story. The wife of a student was undergoing cancer treatments. Dr. D had visited with them and offered to help in any way he could, and as a result, he went shopping for them after he finished his classes. He'd been doing this for weeks. Nothing I learned from him and the courses he taught had as much personal impact on me as finding him in that staircase on a cold, rainy night. Friends, our lives of service not only impact the people that we serve, but those who see us living this servant's life, seeing us willing to give of our time, energy, and talents for the betterment of one another, for the common good, for the improvement of the world, for the coming of God's own kingdom. May you receive the grace of God who walks with you in your suffering this day, and may you find ways to stretch out and to serve others in the areas where you find yourself most in need. Blessings, and have a great St. Patrick's Day.